Doing some of the practice assignments and the math part was kicking my ass. The math part's like laying out, like reading math. You don't use it, at least in my case.
Yeah, it tends to go away. You don't use it.
Are we on chapter 5 or starting 5?
No, today we're starting chapter 4, which is supply and demand, which you've already seen, but you probably need some review.
Yep.
Hayden, I can see that you're there. Do you see the PowerPoint on the screen? You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, good, good. All right. Glad to see you all made it back. Anybody still without power? That's good. All right. Go ahead and call the roll, and then I'll talk about changes we'll be making because of the storm to the schedule. Rafael Bastos, absent. Catherine Brand, absent. William Dagerpont, Grant Dardar, Hayden Dufour, Matthew Gallagher, Patricia Lewis, Abigail Swallow, Sarah Vidrine, Sarah Watson, Dylan West, Lewis Morgan. Okay, anybody I did not call? Okay. Okay, the first exam was scheduled for the 17th. We're going to move that to the 29th. That is a Tuesday, September 29th. We'll cover the same material that was scheduled to cover before. And since we're small class in a big room, everybody gets to be here to take it in person. On the sapling, I know that everybody's had difficulties due to the storm, and some people have had more problems than other people. And I don't know, who's had more problems and who's had fewer problems. So I'm really not going to worry about the due dates for the first exam. Remember, the due dates were every Friday at 7 p.m. with a 24-hour grace period. Do your best to keep up and to not get behind, but I really won't be worrying about if you don't meet one of those Friday deadlines. What is important is that you be caught up by the time of the first exam, which is on the 29th. And so that is when all of the sapling activities for the first exam will close. Okay, so just focus on that. Do the best you can to be ready by then. We missed a week and a half, and we're postponing the exam by a week and a half. So hopefully that won't be too hard to meet. On the sapling, I wanted to mention a couple of things. I really think that the learning curve is especially useful because it lets you get lots and lots of practice. And you get points by answering questions correctly. If you look at the question and then you go back and look at the textbook relevant to that part, there's no penalty at all for doing that. So you get to a question, you don't really know the answer, don't guess. Go back to the textbook and try to figure out what the right answer is, because then if you get the right answer, you get the maximum credit. Whereas if you guess and have to answer it more than once, and you don't get as many points when you do get the correct answer. Remember that on the learning curve, your score is either a 0 or a 100. Once you answer enough questions to get to hit the target, which is generally 600 or 800 points, then you get 100 for that assignment. But remember the goal, you do want to get 100 on each of the learning curve assignments, but the most important goal is that you understand the material. And so even when you get to 100%, you may want to keep answering questions because you want more practice, and it will keep giving you additional questions that will be similar to the ones you've already seen. And especially if you really struggle with some things, even once you've got it up to 100, if you know, I don't really understand some of this, it's worthwhile to continue to answer questions. Won't raise your grade, but it will raise your comprehension, and that's really, your exam score is 80% of your grade. So comprehension is what is really important. There's also it does show the percentage that you get right on the learning curve. And that percentage does not affect your grade, okay? If you really struggle with it at first and you miss a lot, your percentage you get right is going to be relatively low. But as long as you keep going and hit the target, you're going to get 100% for that activity, okay? But I would encourage you to look at that percent you got, your accuracy percentage. And if it's low, then you really need to ask yourself, do I understand this? And if your answer is no, I'm not sure that I do, then keep answering questions. Okay? There are hints that are available, but if you ask for a hint, then you don't get as many points when you get it right. So if you go to the ebook, that will be helpful to you, and it doesn't take away any of the points that you'll be getting. You can skip a question if you don't. I would say if you read the question, you don't understand it, you go to the textbook, you still don't understand it, then just ask to see the answer, and it will show you the answer. You can learn from that. You don't get any points, but you'll come up to another question similar to it, and then you'll be able to get full credit for that. Keep in mind also that as you answer the easier questions, you get to harder questions, and the harder questions give you more points than the easier questions. Okay? So it's not, you don't have a fixed number of questions you have to answer. Okay? You have a fixed number of points you have to eventually get to. I will be revising the sapling dates for after the first exam, and I'll get that new schedule posted later. There's a difficulty that I see with sapling is there's no single place where you can go and see all the activities, the due date, and what your scores are. I've contacted sapling and asked them about that, and they say, no, we can't do that. So that's why I encourage you to print out the sapling schedule, because everything's listed there in order of when they're due. And then as soon as you finish an activity, write your grade down there. And that's not it's kind of a clunky solution, but it works. So you'll know what you've done, how you did, and you'll know what you have left to do. All right, any questions on any of that? All right. One other thing on I think I put up an email or sent you an email yesterday about this. There are some additional resources that are available on Moodle. Right under where it has the sapling schedule, there's a new link there that says additional study resources, I think. And it takes you to a Google Documents sheet where I'm posting things like study guides and practice questions and videos over the practice questions. And I think for this class, I think right now the only thing I have that would be relevant is over supply and demand. Okay? But supply and demand is really, really important. So I'd encourage you at some point to go through those practice questions and then watch the videos, because on those videos I go through the process for answering the questions in a lot of detail. And where people get off, have trouble, is because they're just trying to remember the answers, and they're not focusing on the process you follow to get the right answer. And you know, practicing the process that will get you the right answer is the best way to learn, and it's the way that will save you time. People tend to think, oh, well, I'll just, if I can guess at the right answer, that's the way I can do okay and minimize my study time. No, if you don't understand it, then you really, really have to study a lot, and you still don't do very well. But if you take more extra time and focus on what is the process I need to follow in order to get the right answer, then you do better. You can actually enjoy doing it, and you actually minimize the amount of time you have to study. So it's, all around, it's in your interest to focus carefully on what are the steps we follow to get the right answer. There are a lot of things in life where you can make a snap judgment, look at it real quickly, draw a conclusion. Economics is not one of those things. In fact, we could say that in economics, when there's a kind of an obvious answer that you can jump to quickly, almost always it's wrong. So you got to follow the process to get to the right answer. That's the key. Okay. All right. Questions so far? All right. Today, primarily, we're going to be reviewing supply and demand, because it is so very important, and because I know that even if you did well in macro, that's not a guarantee that you understand supply and demand at a deep level. And you need to understand it better now than you understood it then, because we're going to go kind of behind the supply curve and the demand curve to understand exactly what do they represent, where are they coming from. People tend to think in terms of, well, you understand something or you don't. And that's just absolutely not correct. And just like this morning, I was wearing my shield. I knew I was wearing my shield. I knew that I could not eat anything while wearing my shield. Okay? I knew that, but that did not stop me from taking my sandwich and plunging it into my shield and getting it all messed up. Okay? Why did I do that? I knew I was wearing it. I knew I couldn't eat while I was wearing it, but I forgot. Just like I forgot about the shield, supply and demand analysis is very easy to forget. Yeah, you've seen it before, you understood it at one point, but you need reminders. Okay? And so we're going to be going through a review of that today. But before we get into the review of supply and demand, I want to just get you thinking about economics, because the economic way of thinking is really very different from the way most people think, the way most people have been programmed to think over the years. And so you want to be, as we go through what we're doing, you want to be thinking about, how do I apply this broad way of thinking to everything that I see? Okay? There's so many things we see every day that we don't really think about. Economics helps you to be more observant and to think about what's really going on. And just as an example, think about what you ate for breakfast this morning. Okay. I had coffee with cream and sugar. Do you think I grew that coffee? No. Do you think I know who grew that coffee? No, it's probably somebody in Colombia. Okay. I don't know them. They don't know me. That coffee got grown, it got roasted, it got sent to the United States. You know, was it on a ship, on a plane? I don't know. Uh, who did it? I don't know. I bought it at Walmart. How did it get there? I don't know. Probably it got on a truck somehow. Somebody was maintaining the trucks to keep them going. Somebody was driving the trucks. Somebody had to be at Walmart putting it out on the shelf. Somebody had to be there so they could watch me as I check out. All these people, you know, who knows how many people, hundreds, maybe thousands of people were a part of me getting my coffee this morning. I don't know those people. They are strangers to me. I'm a stranger to them. What they did was very helpful to me. I need my coffee in the morning. Why did they do it? Why did all these strangers do something to help me get my coffee and to help me get my eggs and milk? Think about what you ate for breakfast, how you got here, gasoline, your car, your mask, all these things we have. Most of them we didn't produce ourselves. We don't know who did produce them. They were produced by strangers. Why did these strangers all choose to do things that would be beneficial to us? Are they just really good people? They wanted to help their fellow man?
They have incentive.
They had, part of it is they had an incentive. They believed that by providing what I wanted, they were going to get what they wanted. They believed that trade was mutually beneficial. The buyer benefits and the seller benefits. Okay? Did somebody tell any of those people that they had to do what they did? The guy who was growing the coffee, was he forced to do that? Or the guy who was driving the truck? No, they were making their own choices. Think about yourself. Did somebody tell you, you have to go to college and you have to go to LSUA and you have to take microeconomics? No, those were your choices. That's the way our system works. Everybody gets to make their own choices. Now, your choices are not unconstrained. There are limits to what you can choose to do, but within a certain set of options, you get to choose what you think is best for you. And I get to do the same thing. Nobody told me, you have to teach at LSUA. I taught at Northwestern for almost 20 years and then decided I'm going to teach at LSUA. I get to make my own choices. You get to make your own choices. It's great to have that freedom. And that's not too hard to understand. You're free if people aren't preventing you from doing things. But what is kind of hard to understand is, how is it that we can have an economy where everybody gets to do what they want to do and it doesn't lead to total chaos? How is it that we don't get 3 times more coffee than we want? Or we only get half as many eggs as we want? How is it everybody has the freedom to do what they want to do, and yet when you go to the store, generally the things you want are available? It seems like magic when you stop to think about it, okay? But it's not magic. Okay? It is a property or is an outcome of the kind of economic system that we have. And we don't even have to understand it for it to work. Okay? the people working at Walmart and growing coffee, they may not have ever had any economics at all. Right? They're just trying to get the things they want. Okay? Just like I'm trying to get the things that I want. Okay? And maybe nobody understands exactly how it works, and yet it works under certain conditions. In this class, we'll be talking about, well, what are the policies, what are the institutions that enable the system to function? Because if we don't understand those institutions, then we may create conditions under which the system doesn't work. Just one example, I believe it was last week I saw that the Center for Disease Control issued a regulation that said that if you meet certain conditions, then, and if you live in an apartment, your landlord is not allowed to evict you. I know one of them was if your income is below $99,000, okay, and you don't pay the rent, and you meet several other conditions, then the CDC is saying you cannot be evicted. Is that good for people who live in apartments? On the surface, you'd say, well, of course it's good. It means that you don't have to pay your rent and they can't kick you out. Okay? That seems like it's good. But on the other hand, how does that affect the landlord?
The landlord doesn't have any of the rents to pay for maintenance and upkeep of the building.
If the landlord is not being paid rent, and he doesn't have the funds to maintain the property. And think about what happens over time. Who's going to build new apartments if you know that you can spend all this money building an apartment, and then when people don't pay their rent, you can't kick them out? It's likely to have an adverse long-run effect on renters. The effects are complicated. We can't just look at it quickly and immediately know what is likely to happen. If we impose policies like that change our institutions, then we may end up moving toward a system where things don't work as well as they have in the past. Anyway, those are some things to be thinking about. I hope that as we go through this course, you will take what we study and you'll apply it to the things you see in the store, things you see happening in the news, because there are just so many things that are going on now that are great examples of economic activity and the effect of various policies. To get us into our study, our review of supply and demand, let me remind you of the big picture. Okay? In economics, everything begins with what?
The supply and demand.
Before supply and demand. What is the fundamental economic problem?
Scarcity.
Scarcity. Everything in every economics course anywhere begins with scarcity, which means we don't have enough resources to produce all of the things that we would like to have. As a result, we have to make choices. We can't have everything, so we have to choose what do we want to have, what we want to produce, what do we want to give up. And every society has mechanisms or systems for determining how these questions will be answered. And we can think of the main alternatives, the main economic systems, as kind of falling along a continuum. Okay? At one extreme, we have what you could call socialist systems, socialism. At the other extreme, we have market economies, also called capitalism. Now, most real world economies aren't at one extreme. They're somewhere in the middle. So you got, in a sense, you got an infinite number of economic systems. But each one, you can think of it as a combination of some amount of market-oriented activity, some amount of socialism. Under socialism, all of these decisions about how to use resources are made by the government. In a market economy, resources are owned by private individuals, and with the resources that belong to you, you get to make your own choices, your own decisions. Okay? And then individuals interact with each other in markets. Okay? As people interact, as people are buying and selling, we have prices that emerge. Okay? And we are going to be talking very much all semester about the price mechanism. In fact, in some schools, microeconomics is just called price free. Okay? This whole course is about prices, how prices are determined, and the role that prices play in determining how we're going to use our resources. This course is about identifying situations in which prices work very, very well to help us determine how we're going to use resources. And we'll see there's some situations where prices don't work as well. Okay? We're going to be focusing first on situations where prices do a very good job at helping us use our resources efficiently. And then later, I think it's in chapter 10, we talk about situations where prices are not adequate to give us the efficient outcome that we would like to achieve. We're going to see that prices serve three functions. Okay? Prices communicate information. Prices create incentives. And prices coordinate. Prices coordinate the plans of consumers with the plans of consumers. Okay. Going back to the eggs, you know, how do if all the consumer, if everybody gets to buy as many eggs as they want, and if producers, they don't have to produce eggs, they just produce whatever they want, how can we possibly end up with the right number being produced to match the amount that consumers want to buy? Well, prices coordinate the plans of the consumers with the plans of the producers. Prices do all three of these things, and we're going to see the incredibly vital role that prices play in our economy. Prices are not arbitrary. The producers can't just pick whatever price he wants to charge. Think about a gas station. If the last time I bought gas, I think the price was $1.70, something like that. I'm sure if we talked to the producer and said, would you rather charge $1.70 or $6 a gallon? He'd say, I'd rather charge $6 a gallon. But he knows he can't set a price that high and still sell as much as he wants to sell. Okay? So what determines the price that he's going to charge? Well, that's what supply and demand is all about. In chapters 3, chapter 4, we're looking at competitive markets. That simply means you've got lots of consumers, you've got lots of producers. And each one is so small that they don't have a big effect on the market. Okay? Not all markets fit that description. Okay? What's the opposite of a competitive market?
A non-competitive market.
Okay, a non-competitive, but of all the non-competitive markets you could think of, non-competitive would mean you don't have a lot of competition. What's the least competition you could have? A monopoly. Okay, so we start out chapter 3 and chapter 4 talking about competitive markets. Then later on, we will talk about monopoly, where you literally have no competition. You've got one producer. Okay? And then there are two other types of markets that are kind of intermediate between competitive and monopoly. So we will talk about all the different types of markets. But for now, we're only going to be talking about a highly competitive market where you've got lots of consumers and lots of producers. And the supply and demand framework is the framework we use to think about how things work in a market economy or in a highly competitive economy. And as we go into this, one of the examples we will talk about is, I think I mentioned this last time. Did I tell you what happened to the price of oil last April? Okay, minus $37. Yeah. How can that be? A lot of people look at that and say, "That's crazy." It just shows that people are just crazy. Okay? But no, when you see something happening in the real world, in a market, and it doesn't make any sense to you, don't accept the conclusion, well, somebody out there is crazy. Say, I don't understand what's going on. How can I use my model to understand this? And even though it seems really weird, we will be able to show that under certain conditions, it makes sense for the price of oil to be negative. Most of the time, those conditions aren't relevant, aren't there, but sometimes they are. And even when the price is negative, the price does serve those three functions. It communicates information. If the price of a product is negative, what does that tell consumers? Apparently, there's a lot of it. What kind of incentive does it create? If the producer is telling you, come buy my product, I won't charge you, I'll give you money, take this product away. That's creating incentive for somebody to buy it. Okay? And the price is coordinating the plans of the consumers with the plans of the producers. Even in that bizarre seeming situation, the price was serving a very, very important function, as we'll see in a little. Okay, to review. Okay. As we go through this, we just review some of the basic graphs. Make sure you really understand what I'm saying, what the graph is saying, because you've got to be able to read the graph. Okay? You're going to be looking at a graph like this for the whole semester. And if it doesn't make sense to you, we want to deal with that early so that it will make sense to you. Because I've seen people go through a whole course, fail it, take it again, fail it, and then finally come and say, I don't understand the graph. Okay? There's no stigma to not understanding the graph, but let me know when you're having trouble. Okay? And just say, go through that again, and I can do that. Here's basic demand curve. Okay, notice what we have on the axis. Okay, we've got the price of the product per unit. On the horizontal axis, we've got the quantity of the product that will be demanded. Okay? Why is the curve negatively sloped? What does that tell you? Why is the demand curve negatively sloped? What information does that give you? That's right. As the price goes down, people will buy more. As the price falls, the quantity demanded goes up. Okay? And think about why that makes sense. It makes sense because people's income is scarce. They don't have as much money as they would need to buy everything they want. Okay? And so they have to look at each dollar and say, where's the best place to spend this money? And when the price of a product is high, it means you spend a lot of money to get 1 unit. If the price is low, you spend a little bit and you can get more than 1 unit. So as the price falls, that product becomes a better use of your money. And so people say, hey, I'm going to buy more of this. I'm going to buy less of other things. That's the intuition that this demand curve is giving you. Okay? You need to understand the intuition, but you also need to understand the graph. Okay? Because like I said, we were using this every day, and it's going to be very painful for you if you don't, every day you look at it and say, I don't understand that. Okay? So if you're after today, if you say, I really don't understand it, then come see me, make an appointment, and we'll go through it, because this is not rocket science. Okay? But some people really do have a kind of a phobia against graphs. And I've seen that, and it can be dealt with. You can understand it, but it just takes extra work sometimes. And so this is the demand curve. This is the demand schedule. You see the list of prices. You see as the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Just a numerical way of representing what the graph is giving you there. Okay. Note the difference between demand and quantity demanded. Okay? Quantity demanded is just a number. Okay? It's a quantity. So if the price is 55, quantity is 5. If the price is 20, quantity demanded is 25. Okay? Quantity demanded is just a quantity, but demand is something much more sophisticated. Demand refers to a relationship between the price of the good and the quantity demanded of that good. Okay? This whole curve is the demand curve, or is demand. Okay? So you have to discipline yourself to not use demand and quantity demanded interchangeably. They are not the same thing. Okay? If the price is 55 and it goes down to 20, does that cause the demand for oil to change? No.
The demand itself is fixed.
The demand, as long as we're on this demand curve, then demand hasn't changed. If the price goes down and everything else relevant to the consumer remains constant, then the quantity demanded goes up. Okay? We go from 5 to 25, but demand hasn't changed because this whole curve represents demand. Okay? Demand is a relationship between the price of the good and the quantity demanded of that good. We could also say that demand is a function. Okay? We could mathematically, we could say the quantity demanded is a function of a number of variables, and the most important one being the price of the product. Most of the time we won't express demand as an equation, but it's important to recognize that it could be expressed that way. Okay? Demand is a function. Okay? In fact, we could just give you one example. We could say the quantity demanded of ice cream is, just making up some numbers in a certain community. Maybe it's 1,000, maybe this is dips of ice cream. 1,000 minus 0.1 times the price of ice cream. What else would be relevant to how much ice cream people would want?
Presence of option or alternates.
Substitutes. Yep, that would be relevant. The easiest thing to put in here would be the temperature. Okay? So let's say it's 10 times the temperature. Okay? Think about what this equation is saying. Okay? It's and again, the numbers are just arbitrary, but it's making a point. This equation, which would be a demand equation, is saying for a particular market, particular area, the quantity of ice cream dips that people want would be 1,000 minus 0.1 times the price. In other words, as the price goes up, people are going to buy less, plus 10 times the temperature, which would mean as the temperature goes up, what's happening to the quantity? No, if the temperature is going, if this is a plus here, then the quantity, as the temperature goes up, the quantity demanded is going to go up. As it gets hotter, people want more ice cream. Okay? So this would be a demand equation. And, there are going to be other variables that would be relevant as well. But when we talk about the demand curve, we're saying, well, let's hold everything else constant. Right? We don't really want to get into the temperature, so we'll just assume that the temperature remains constant. People's income, that's going to have an effect on how much they buy. Let's hold that constant. Let's hold everything constant except the price. And let's let the price change and see what effect that has on the quantity demanded. That is what this equation or this curve is doing. It's saying, let's assume that their income stayed the same, the temperature stays the same, everything that affects the consumer stays the same, except the price is going up or down. Okay? And the demand curve allows us to see when the price goes up, how that affects the amount people buy. When it goes down, how it affects the amount they buy as well. So this is one demand curve. Well, okay. One important thing to be aware of is that there are two different ways we can read the demand curve. We can read it horizontally, or we can read it vertically. Okay? Here, this is talking about a horizontal reading. Horizontal means across. So when we're doing a horizontal reading, it means we start with one particular price, and we ask, if the price is this much, what is the quantity consumers will want to buy? So we start with a price, we read horizontally, and we read down. We see that if the price is 20, then the quantity demanded is going to be 25. Okay? Then the other way we can read the demand curve is vertically. Vertically means up. So with a vertical reading of the demand curve, you start with some quantity, you're 25, you read up to the demand curve, and then you read over. Okay? So that point right there is telling us the value of that 25th unit to consumers. Okay? It's telling us there is a consumer out there who is willing to pay up to $20 for that 25th barrel of oil. Okay? He doesn't want to pay that much. He'd like to pay as little as possible. But the demand curve is telling us that there is a consumer who's willing to pay up to $20 for that 25th unit. For the 5th unit, there's a consumer who'd be willing to pay up to $55 for that unit. For the 6th, it's going to be a little lower. For each quantity, if you read up to the demand curve, then it tells you the marginal value of that unit to a consumer. So this demand curve, we could also call it the marginal benefit curve, okay? Because it's showing us the value of each unit to a consumer, how much they're willing to pay for an extra unit. And so that negatively sloped demand curve is telling us that the more we get of something, what happens to the value of an extra unit? It goes down, okay? You go to a pizza place, maybe you're willing to pay $5 for the first slice, but you're not willing to pay as much for the second or the third or the fourth. You know, at some point, you don't get any benefit from an extra slice of pizza, okay? That is reflecting this negatively sloped demand curve. Okay, consumer surplus. This is an idea. I think it was developed in chapter 3, but it's going to be very, very important. We actually developed it in macroeconomics. You may recall it, but we didn't do much with it. In this course, we're going to use consumer surplus a lot because it's going to help us to analyze a number of different policies. For example, the president has been big on imposing tariffs on other countries, okay? Because he doesn't like various things they're doing. Okay? We're going to be able to use this idea of consumer surplus to analyze what is the effect of imposing a tariff on a product, okay? Or also a tax, just a general tax. What is the effect on consumers and producers when you impose a tax or a subsidy? Okay? Who benefits? Who's going to be hurt? Okay? Our analysis using consumer surplus will enable us to answer those questions. Do you remember what consumer surplus is? Anything? We didn't spend much time on it, okay? But one thing that's really important to point out is when we talk about consumer surplus, that is not the same as talking about having a surplus in a market. Okay? It's really unfortunate we use the same word there, but we do, okay? Over in chapter 3 and chapter 4, when we talk about a surplus, okay, that means that, let's see. Let's put it here. When we talk about a surplus, that means the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are not the same. If we have a surplus, which is bigger? Quantity supplied or quantity demanded? We have a surplus, quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. Producers are trying to produce more than consumers want to buy. So the producers have output they can't sell. That's a surplus, which is totally different from consumer surplus. And be sure you understand the intuition behind it. Consumer surplus is the consumer's gain from exchange. It's the benefit the consumer is getting from purchasing the product. So if you go to a restaurant and you just love the meal and you would have been willing to pay $40 for that meal, okay? but you only had to pay, the price was only $10. Okay? Then you're getting a consumer surplus. You're getting a net, you got something worth $40 to you, but you only had to pay $10. So what's your consumer surplus? $30. You have a $30 net gain from transacting in that market. It's a measure of how much gain the consumer is getting. And notice it's not in terms of units of the product. We're measuring consumer surplus in terms of dollars. It's the difference between the maximum price you would have been willing to pay and the actual price that you have to pay. Okay, you know, I think about a computer. You know, I think the last my Surface, the university bought, the last computer I bought, I think it was around $500. Okay? And I think, you know, if I had to pay, you know, $1,000, $2,000 for it, or do without a computer, what would it be worth to me? And it's scary to think about how much I would be willing to pay rather than do without the computer. Okay? So if I'm willing to pay $2,000 for it, and they're selling it to me for $500, I'm getting $1,500 of consumer surplus. It's the measure of the gain that I'm getting. That's the key idea. Now, on the graph, it's very easy to represent where that consumer surplus is, because what did we, okay, we said consumer surplus is the difference between what? The first part is it's the difference between the maximum you're willing to pay and the market price. So how much were you willing to pay? Not how much did you pay, but how much were you willing to pay and how much did you have to pay? How much you're willing to pay is represented by the demand curve. Okay, so here, take the one of these very first units, reading vertically up to the demand curve, and then reading over. You see that, if you can read that, that first unit is worth almost $80. Okay? That's what somebody's willing to pay for it. Next unit is worth a little bit less. As more is consumed, the value of each extra unit is coming down. But here, here we're assuming the market price is $20. So on that first unit, they're willing to pay about 80, only have to pay 20, so there's consumer surplus of $60, a $60 net gain to the consumer. And then for the next unit, it's going to be almost the same, a little bit smaller, because that second unit isn't worth quite as much to the consumer, but they're only having to pay 20 for it. As they consume more and more, the marginal benefit from each extra unit is getting lower and lower. Okay? But on all of these extra units, since the marginal benefit is greater than what they have to pay, there's consumer surplus on each of those extra units. Consumer continues to buy all the way out to here. And I believe that is supposed to be $70. Actually, whatever it is, okay? They're going to stop there, because what is that last unit there, what is it worth to the consumer? No, because reading up for that last unit, reading up to the demand curve and over, it's $20. Okay? If the price is 20, then they keep buying. It's like if you go to the store, you go to the pizza place, if the pizza is $1 a slice and the first one is worth $10 to you, you buy it. If the second slice is worth $6, you buy it. You keep buying more and more slices as long as an extra slice is worth at least $1 to you. Once an extra slice is worth less than $1 to you, you stop buying. Okay? That's one of the most fundamental economic ideas. You compare marginal benefit with marginal cost, and you keep buying as long as the benefit is greater than the cost. And when that's no longer true, then you stop buying. It's a very simple idea, but it recurs throughout everything in economics. Okay? So the consumer is only going to buy this quantity, whatever that quantity is, for all of these previous units. The benefit was greater than the price that the consumer had to pay. And so all of this green area represents consumer surplus. Okay? The demand curve is showing you the most the consumer would have to pay. The price line is showing you what they actually have to pay. And so the difference, all this area in here, is the net gain going to consumers, which we call consumer surplus. And so that's, we started with the intuition. Now we've got a graph representing that. And then to actually calculate it, over here, they give you some numbers where, okay, we're assuming the price is 20. Here it looks like the quantity that will be demanded is 90, okay? So we've already said that consumer surplus is this green area, okay? How do we measure that area? How do we measure consumer surplus? Okay? Well, this does take a little bit of math, but we won't be doing a lot of this. Okay? You do want to understand this, but most of the time we won't be doing calculations that are even this involved. Okay? Here, all you have to remember is this. To find the area of a triangle, there's an equation you use for it. What's that equation? 1/2 the base times the height. Okay? And consumer surplus here is a triangle. Okay? This is the base. This is the height. Okay? So the base goes from 0 out to here, so that's 90. Where people have trouble is with the height, because they see, I think that's $80, okay? And they want to plug that in for the height. But notice the height doesn't go from 80 all the way down to 0. The height is just from here to here. So that's 80 minus 20, which is 60. Okay? And then the rest of our equation, the area of a triangle is 1/2 the base of 90 times the height of 60. And if you work that out, I believe it comes out to 2,700, something like that. Okay. You do want to be able to do that calculation. Okay. So it's 1/2 the base times the height. If you apply this, what you have in this graph, then you'll be set on all of those kinds of questions. Okay? Any question about that? Okay. We've talked only about a change in quantity demanded. We said if everything stays the same, but the price goes up, quantity demanded changes. But there are a lot of other things that affect the consumer. For ice cream, temperature, but also income. there are going to be a lot of other things that affect the consumer. If any of those other things change, then this entire demand curve is going to shift. If something happens that causes consumers to want more, then that whole curve is going to shift to the right. That's an increase. Okay? Notice if the curve is shifting to the right, that means that for any given price, okay, 25 for example, before the change, the quantity demanded was 70. After the change, the quantity demanded is something bigger. So if you have a rightward shift of the demand curve, that is always an increase in demand, and it means for any given price, the quantity demanded will now be larger than before. You can also look at it as if demand is increasing, not only is that point shifting to the right, you can also think of it as shifting up. Okay? So if there's an increase in demand for any given quantity, consumers are now willing to pay a higher price. Okay? Have a decrease in demand, same thing. If something happens that causes people to want less of the product at each price, then the whole demand curve is shifting to the left. That's a decrease in demand, not just quantity demanded, it's a decrease in demand, which means a shift of the whole curve to the left. Or you can think of it as shifting down. Okay? This point is going over to here, but you can also think of it as moving down. Okay? And it's useful to think about it in both ways. When it's moving from here to there, that means for any given price, the quantity demanded now is going to be smaller than before. It also means for any given unit, the price consumers are willing to pay is now going to be smaller than before. They were willing to pay 50 before, now they're willing to pay only 25. Okay, so we talked about an increase. First, we talked about a particular demand curve and how quantity demanded varies as we move along that curve. Then we said, well, if demand increases, that's a rightward shift. If it decreases, that's a leftward shift. Now we're dealing with the question, well, what can cause demand to shift? What are the things that could cause those things to happen? And here we have a very concise summary of the main things that can cause the demand for a product to shift. And these are pretty intuitive. You know. Obviously, how much income you have will have an impact on how much you demand. Think about the demand for luxury clothing. Okay? If your income goes down, what happens to your demand for luxury clothing? It's going to go down, okay? Which is why Neiman Marcus filed for bankruptcy, okay? Or one part of it, that they sell luxury items. When we go into a severe recession where lots of people have less income, they cut back on purchasing luxury clothing. And if you're selling luxury clothing, you're in trouble. Population, if you have more consumers, they're going to buy more. Demand is going to increase. Price of substitutes and complements. I won't go through those here. Remember, substitutes are two things that do roughly the same thing. If you're thirsty, you might drink Coke, you might drink Pepsi. They're substitutes for each other. If the price of Coke increases, what happens to the demand? Oops. What happens to the demand for Pepsi? Demand is going to go up. Is that just a change in quantity demanded, or is that actual demand for Pepsi? It's because they are substitutes. If Coke becomes more expensive, then the entire demand curve for Pepsi is going to shift. Okay? Some people who were going to buy Coke before now say, I'm going to buy Pepsi. So the whole curve shifts to the right, whereas if Coke becomes cheaper, then the demand for Pepsi would shift to the left. Okay, almost out of time. We went through all of that. That's dealing with demand. Okay? Works very similar with supply, except with demand, we're describing the behavior of consumers. With supply, we're describing the behavior of producers. So why does the supply curve slope upward? It's because if the price is low, quantity supplied is going to be relatively low. If the price goes up, it's now profitable to produce a lot more of that product. So as the price goes up, the quantity supplied also goes up. That's what the upward sloping supply curve is telling us, and that reflects what is called the law of supply, just as the demand curve. The downward slope of the demand curve reflects the law of demand. Okay? We can also, we won't go into it today, producer surplus is an important idea. Consumer surplus was a measure of the net gain going to consumers. Producer surplus, you would expect, is a measure of the gain going to producers. Okay? And it's the difference between the price they actually get and the minimum price they would have been willing to accept. Okay? When you have an increase in supply, it's a rightward shift of the curve. You have a decrease in supply, then that is just the opposite. That is a leftward shift of the supply curve. Okay. Really important to review the things that can shift supply. Okay. You got to be comfortable with what can shift the demand curve and what can shift the supply curve. And here you have a concise summary of those things that can shift supply. Now, that's a quick review of the supply curve and of the demand curve. Once we talk about supply and demand, what do we then have to talk about? Once we put supply and demand together, what can we then talk about? Starts with an E. Well, I'm sorry? Well, we can, but not what I'm looking for. Equilibrium. Okay. The demand curve. So we're interested in, we use supply and demand to help us think about prices. Prices depend on what consumers are willing to pay and what producers are willing to accept. The demand curve represents consumer behavior. The supply curve represents producer behavior. Once we put those two together, we see there's an intersection. We call that the equilibrium price, because that is the price that brings us into balance. Once we get to that equilibrium, the quantity that consumers want to buy is matched by the quantity producers want to sell. And that's where we will pick up next time. We'll talk about equilibrium. We'll go through some examples of how we use that analysis. And then we will hopefully get started in chapter 5. Got to understand supply and demand to understand chapter 5, because it gets into something called elasticity, which is very useful but it's confusing if you don't understand supply and demand. Okay. If you have questions, let me know. Okay. You can send me an email or give me a call, and I'll be happy to help you.